The wind howled as the last light rail pulled out of the station, leaving behind a streak of cold air and silence. Julia Bennett stood on the platform, hugging her coat tighter, her fingers trembling not from the cold, but from something deeper, an exhaustion that had seeped into her bones. She had just finished another 12-hour shift at Portland General. It had been exactly 33 days since she started her job as a full-time nurse. 33 days of fluorescent lighting, harsh antiseptic smells, and coworkers who seemed more obsessed with designer handbags than saving lives. Every break room conversation circled around money, vacations, or men, never once touching on empathy, pain, or why they even chose this profession in the first place. She hated it. Julia had once believed nursing was a calling, a way to heal, to hold someone's hand when they were afraid. But here, it felt like she was drowning in a system that didn't care. The suffering of patients didn't just break her heart, it numbed it. And each day, the numbness spread a little further. She looked up at the station clock. The last had bare, leaves strewn like regrets across the pavement. She pulled her scarf tighter and turned the corner toward the Max Blue Line entrance, silently cursing the hospital's shift scheduling. As she reached the bottom of the stairwell, she saw him. He was standing just to the side of the vending machines, half in shadow. Young, maybe late 20s, painfully thin, wrapped in a coat so worn it had holes under both sleeves. His jeans were stiff with grime, and one shoelace was nothing but frayed string. But it wasn't the clothes that made Julia stop. It was his face. For a moment, her breath caught. His profile, the slope of his nose, the curve of his jaw. It reminded her so vividly of someone she had tried desperately to forget. Someone who had once whispered promises to her under a winter sky and then left without warning. Jason, her ex-boyfriend, had broken her heart in a way that still pulsed beneath her ribs. And this man, this stranger, he looked like him. So much so that she found herself stepping closer without thinking. The man noticed her and quickly turned his face away, eyes dropping to the floor. His posture shrank, as if ashamed of being seen. "Jason," she blurted before she could stop herself. The man shook his head slowly. "Sorry, ma'am. My name's Noah." His voice was soft, rough like gravel, but there was something gentle in it, something that stopped Julia from walking away. Noah. It didn't mean anything to her. He was just another man left behind by the world, right? Just another face blurred in the crowd of those society refused to see. But for some reason, this one stayed with her. He extended a hand, not to shake hers, but to ask. His fingers were raw and cracked, his nails chipped. She reached into her coat pocket and found a crumpled $5 bill. Then, instead of handing it to him, she asked, "Are you hungry?" He looked up, surprised. "Yeah, I guess I am." "Wait here," she said. 10 minutes later, she returned from a nearby convenience store with a coffee and a packet of peanut butter crackers. He accepted them like they were gold, thanking her 3 times before taking a careful sip. As he ate, Julia stood silently, watching the steam rise from his paper cup. "What happened to you?" she asked finally. "Why are you out here?" He hesitated. Then he answered, "My mom drank herself to death. My stepdad kicked me out when I turned 18. Said I was just another mouth to feed. No ID, no diploma. Just drifted. Tried getting work, but no one hires without papers. Now I sleep near the old rail station, where it's warm from the heating vents." He spoke without anger, just quiet resignation. Julia felt something inside her unravel. She had grown up without a father, too. Her mother had worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. There was something painfully familiar in his story. She took a breath, then said something she never imagined she would say. "You can come with me. I'll get you cleaned up. There's a couch, food, a warm shower, but there's one catch." Noah blinked at her. "I'm going to tell my mother you're my fiancé. Otherwise, she won't let me bring you in. And you have to play along, okay? Just nod, smile, and follow my lead." He stared at her as if trying to understand whether she was serious. "You want to bring home a homeless man and pretend I'm your fiancé?" "Not because I'm crazy," Julia replied quickly. "Because she's controlling. Because she doesn't approve of anyone I date. Because maybe I'm sick of being told what kind of man I should love." Noah sipped his coffee and looked down at the sidewalk. "You don't have to stay," she added. "Just one night. If it gets too weird, you can leave. But it's cold out here. And I'm really, really tired of feeling alone." There was a long pause. Then Noah stood up. "Okay," he said. "You win. I'll play the part." Julia smiled for the first time that day. They walked side by side down the quiet street, two silhouettes against the misty orange haze of Portland's old street lamps. She didn't know it then, but this cold night, born from fatigue, frustration, and a reckless impulse, was about to become the turning point of her life. And so was he. Linda Bennett didn't open the door. She flung it open. Julia barely had time to say, "Hi, Mom," before her mother's eyes locked onto the stranger standing behind her. The look on Linda's face shifted so fast, from confusion to suspicion to something dangerously close to rage, that Julia instinctively took a step in front of Noah. "Who's this?" Linda asked flatly. Julia didn't hesitate. "This is Noah. He's my fiancé." The silence was immediate and brutal. The ticking clock above the stove in their cramped kitchen seemed to echo louder than ever. Linda crossed her arms. "Fiancé? Since when? Who is this man?" "Noah Reed," he said, his voice calm but quiet. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." Linda didn't offer her hand. She didn't even blink. Her gaze swept over him. His tattered shoes, oversized jacket, the stubble on his chin, and returned to her daughter like a slap. "You brought a homeless man into my home and told me he's your fiancé?" Julia spoke evenly. "He's staying with us for a while. We needed somewhere warm tonight." Linda's nostrils flared. "This is a decent apartment, not a shelter. I've worked my entire life to keep this place together, and now you're dragging in—" "He's not dragging," Julia interrupted. "He's walking in. With me." For a moment, no one moved. Then Linda turned sharply and walked back toward the hallway, muttering under her breath. "I should have let you move in with your aunt when I had the chance." Noah lingered in the doorway. "Maybe I should go." "No," Julia said firmly. "You're staying. Come in. Sit." They stepped inside. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, everything clean but lived in. Faded green carpet, crocheted curtains. The smell of overcooked lentils still hung in the air. It wasn't much, but it was home. And for tonight it would be his. Julia led Noah to the tiny kitchen table and placed a chair out for him. "Mom, I'll make dinner. You don't have to do anything." Linda didn't respond. In the kitchen, Julia boiled potatoes and sautéed mushrooms while Noah sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, eyes scanning the ceiling like it might fall on him at any moment. She glanced over her shoulder several times, watching how still he was, how careful, like a man trained to be invisible. Dinner was quiet. Linda pushed food around her plate without eating. Julia talked just enough to fill the space, asking Noah about music, books, anything neutral. He answered cautiously, choosing his words like stepping stones across a frozen river. Afterward, Julia tossed his clothes in the washing machine and handed him a towel. "Bathrooms down the hall. Hot water works, mostly." He nodded and walked slowly, as if unsure he wouldn't be stopped. When he closed the bathroom door, Julia leaned against the wall and exhaled. From the living room, her mother's voice cut through the quiet. "You're out of your mind." Julia didn't answer. She had nothing left to argue with, nothing left to explain. 20 minutes later, Noah returned, his hair damp, his skin flushed from heat. He was wearing a clean t-shirt Julia had found in her father's old drawer. It was too big, but it smelled of soap, not sweat. She smiled at him and pointed to the floor beside her bed. "There's an extra blanket. I'll make it up. You'll sleep here tonight." He looked at the arrangement, a folded quilt, a makeshift pillow, and then at her. "I can sleep on the couch." "No, you're staying in here. Mom would have a heart attack if she saw you in the living room again." He laughed softly just once. "You're serious about this fake fiancé thing?" "Very. You'll need to act like it tomorrow morning too. And don't worry, she'll get over it." "I don't think she will," he murmured. Julia didn't respond. Instead, she knelt down and began smoothing the blanket on the floor. Noah watched her for a long moment. "You didn't have to do this, you know. Most people just walk by. They don't even see me." She didn't look up. "Well, I did." Something passed between them then. Not love, not yet. But something quiet and real. A recognition. A shared understanding that maybe, just maybe, neither of them was as alone as they thought. Later, as Julia lay in bed and Noah curled beneath the blanket on the floor, the apartment was finally quiet. The city beyond the window whispered in wind and distant sirens. The radiator clicked. And in that silence, Julia spoke into the dark. "You're not Jason. I know that. But for some reason, when I saw you tonight, I didn't feel scared. I just felt like I was supposed to stop." Noah didn't say anything. But a few seconds later, she heard his voice, low and rough but steady. "Maybe I was supposed to be there too." And then they both fell asleep. Noah adapted faster than Julia expected. By the third morning, he was already rinsing breakfast dishes before she even asked. By the end of the first week, he had fixed the crooked curtain rod in the hallway, oiled the squeaky door hinge in the bathroom, and restrung the laundry line that had been sagging off the balcony for months. He didn't ask for anything. He simply noticed what was broken and quietly made it whole again. Julia came home each evening exhausted, her body aching from long shifts. But there was always something waiting: warm food, a folded blanket, a small note with a scribbled joke. Sometimes it was just a simple, "You survived another day." Gold star. Other times, it was a smile from across the room as he stirred soup in her old saucepan. It didn't take long before she started looking forward to coming home more than anything else in her day. Linda, on the other hand, was unmoved. Each morning, she grumbled about the guest, refusing to say Noah's name. She muttered about rent, about pride, about how this whole situation would humiliate them if anyone found out. And yet, despite all her complaints, she never kicked him out. She watched him with guarded eyes, testing, waiting for proof that he was a threat, a burden, a mistake. Noah never gave her that proof. Even when she spoke to him with disdain, he answered politely. Even when she slammed the door in his face, he took it in silence. Julia noticed. She noticed everything. One evening, after a long day of flu patients and short staffing, Julia came home to the smell of roasted potatoes and garlic. Noah had borrowed a few spices from the neighbor upstairs and somehow made magic out of 3 sad-looking carrots and half a bag of rice. They sat together on the balcony, sharing a plate, while the city lights flickered beneath a blanket of fog. Julia glanced at him between bites. "You're really good at this, you know." He shrugged. "When you spend enough nights with nothing, you learn how to make a lot from a little." She nodded. Then, without thinking, she asked, "Did you ever fall in love?" Noah stared out at the street below for a long time. "Once. A long time ago. She was the first person who looked at me like I mattered." "What happened?" "I left before I could ruin her life." Julia didn't respond, but something in her chest tightened. That night, Julia woke from a dream with a sharp pain in her calf, a deep, stabbing cramp that made her cry out. She twisted in bed, clutching her leg, breathing hard through her teeth. Then came the sound of footsteps. Noah appeared in the doorway within seconds, eyes wide with worry. "Are you okay?" "It's nothing, just a cramp." He crouched beside the bed without a word and gently took her foot in his hands. His fingers were warm, surprisingly sure. He began massaging the muscle slowly, easing the tension with practiced care. Julia winced at first, then sighed as the pain began to melt. "You don't have to do that," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I want to." He moved from her foot to her shin, his touch soft but steady. The room was dark except for the pale glow from the hallway light. She felt his hands trace the length of her leg, then pause. He looked up at her. "You okay?" She nodded. He reached higher, hesitating only a second, then continued, kneeling beside her as if the world had grown suddenly still. There was no rush, no noise, no question, just the sound of her breath and his hands and the silence that asked for nothing but to be held. When he finally kissed her, it wasn't desperate. It wasn't calculated. It was slow, deliberate, and completely unlike anything Julia had felt before. At first, she stiffened. "Noah, this isn't part of the act." He didn't pull away. "I know. I thought it was at first too. But it's not. Not for me." Julia's voice trembled. "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it for you. I'm saying it because I feel it. I didn't expect this. I didn't come here to fall for you. But I have. And if this isn't what you want, I'll leave right now." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and touched his face. Her fingertips brushed against the faint stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she stopped thinking. They didn't speak again that night, not with words. And the next morning, when Linda found Noah making coffee in the kitchen shirtless, humming a tune from the radio, she stormed back to her room and slammed the door so hard the window rattled. Julia didn't even flinch, because for once her heart was full, and her silence wasn't defeat. It was peace. It happened on a Tuesday. Julia had picked up a back-to-back shift, her third in a row, because one of the night nurses had called in sick. She was supposed to be home by 6, but it was nearly 9 when she finally walked through the apartment door, her scrubs damp with rain and the weight of the world clinging to her shoulders. She dropped her bag by the door and called out, "Noah?" Silence. She moved into the kitchen. The table was cleared. The dish rack was empty. No note, no plate, no folded napkin. Just stillness. A strange chill crept up her spine. "Noah," she called again, this time louder. Linda's voice rang out from her bedroom, sharp and careless. "He's gone." Julia turned toward the hall. "What do you mean, gone?" Her mother stepped into view, arms crossed, eyes cold. "He left, took his things. Not that he had much." Julia's heart skipped. Why? Did something happen? Linda didn't blink. Maybe he finally realized he doesn't belong here. Julia stared at her. "What did you say to him?" "Only the truth." Julia's mouth went dry. "What truth?" Linda's voice grew sharper, defensive. "That he's not your future. That he's just a broken man playing house in someone else's life. That you, my daughter, deserve more than a charity case with no job, no education, no plan." Julia's voice cracked. "You told him I had a real fiancé, didn't you?" Her mother hesitated, just long enough to confirm everything. Julia's hands trembled. "You lied to him." I protected you. You destroyed me." She didn't wait for another word. Julia stormed into her bedroom. The blanket Noah had slept on was folded neatly at the foot of her bed. The shirt he wore that first night was gone. The floor felt colder without him in it. She stood there, breath shallow, throat tight. Then she collapsed onto the bed and cried harder than she had in years. For days she waited. She walked the streets near the station where they'd met. She asked the men near the shelters if they'd seen him. She checked parks, overpasses, benches. Nothing. No one knew him. No one had seen anyone who matched his description. At the hospital, she worked in silence. Her smile disappeared. Her spirit faded. And her coworkers, the ones who once scoffed at her, now kept their distance, unsure how to handle the grief she never spoke of. Weeks passed. Then came the nausea. At first, Julia chalked it up to stress. She hadn't been eating much, hadn't been sleeping well. But when it continued, morning after morning, relentless and unforgiving, she knew. She didn't need a test. She didn't need a doctor. She was pregnant. standing alone in the staff restroom, staring at the trembling lines on the test strip. Julia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Her hands gripped the sink. The father of her baby was a man who no longer existed in her world. When she told her mother, it didn't go well. Linda leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a sour expression carving lines deeper into her face. "You've lost your mind." Julia didn't answer. Linda sneered. "So what now? You're going to raise a homeless man's baby under my roof." He wasn't homeless. He was human. He was a mistake. Julia's eyes filled with tears. "No, you were the mistake. Letting you tell me who to love. Letting you scare him away." Linda turned red. "You think I'm the villain here? You're ruining your life. You think this baby's going to save you." "No," Julia whispered, "but I'm going to save it." The words left her lips like a vow. And with that, she walked out of the kitchen and into her room, closing the door behind her. That night, she lay in bed, hands over her stomach, whispering to something not yet real, something fragile and unseen. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said into the dark, "but I won't let anyone take you from me. Not again. Not this time." Days blurred into one another. Julia worked. She slept. She vomited. And then she worked again. Her belly began to swell. Her spirit did not. At the hospital, whispers spread like wildfire. A young nurse with no husband, no plan. Rumors turned cruel. Her old roommate joked about finding a donor behind a dumpster. Someone in the break room said she'd probably trapped a guy for rent. Julia heard every word. She never responded. Only Dr. Wallace Keene, the seasoned OB-GYN, treated her with the same kindness he always had. When she came in for checkups, he offered her water, chocolate, and space to breathe. When she cried during ultrasounds, he didn't ask why. He just handed her a tissue and said, "You're going to be a wonderful mother." And one cold evening, when she showed up to her appointment shaking with rage after a coworker left a condom in her locker, he locked his office door, poured 2 cups of peppermint tea from his drawer, and said, "They don't define you. Your love does." Julia wept into her hands, unable to stop. "I don't think I can do this." "You already are," Dr. Keene said. "You're showing up. That's enough." And for the first time in weeks, Julia believed him. But the nights were still long, and the emptiness next to her bed still echoed Noah's name. There were nights when Julia would fall asleep with her hands cupped gently over her stomach, whispering lullabies she half remembered from childhood. Other nights, she simply stared at the ceiling, motionless, numb, as rain slid down the window in long, quiet streaks. The silence in the apartment had grown thick, almost hostile. Linda no longer yelled. She didn't slam doors or throw guilt. She simply said nothing at all, and that somehow was worse. Mother and daughter now existed like parallel lines in the same small space, always near, never touching. Meals were eaten separately, conversations reduced to basic logistics. Julia spent most of her time behind her closed door, avoiding confrontation, avoiding memory, avoiding the sharp sound of her own thoughts. But there was one person she couldn't avoid, her baby. Each flutter in her belly brought a new wave of emotion, sometimes joy, sometimes fear, but always sharp. There was no denying its presence anymore. It was there, growing, living, depending on her. And despite everything, despite the judgment, the loneliness, the absence of the father, Julia began to build her life around that tiny, beating heart. She started walking more, talking to the baby out loud. She'd sit at the window with a warm mug of tea and tell stories, hoping her voice would carry something soft into the world inside her. "I don't know who you'll look like," she whispered one afternoon, as sunlight cut across the faded carpet. "But I hope you have his eyes, and maybe his heart." It was a good one, even if it broke a little too easily. Linda walked past the door just then and paused, but said nothing. Just stood there, listening to a conversation she didn't understand. Later that week, as Julia struggled to reach her feet after dropping a spoon, Linda finally spoke. "I'm not proud of what I did." Julia looked up. Her mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes tired. "I was scared," Linda continued, "and angry. You don't get how hard it is to watch your child throw everything away." Julia rose slowly, one hand on the small of her back. "I didn't throw anything away. I chose something. A baby. With no father." Julia's voice was calm. "With me. That's enough." Linda didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the kitchen and began peeling carrots. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. That night, Julia dreamed of Noah. He was sitting at the station where they first met, wearing that same torn coat, sipping coffee from a paper cup. She ran toward him, but every step she took seemed to push him farther away. When she finally reached the bench, it was empty. She woke up crying, soaked in sweat. The next morning, she decided to do something she hadn't done since he left. She put on her warmest coat, wrapped her scarf twice, and headed for the old Mac's station downtown. The city smelled of smoke and damp pavement. She walked every corner of that intersection, asked every man with a blanket, every vendor, every familiar face. "Have you seen him? Tall, thin, brown eyes, quiet." They all shook their heads. "Not in weeks." "Sorry, sweetheart." "Try the shelters near Burnside." She tried them all. Nothing. By the time she got home, her feet ached and her coat was soaked. Her mother met her at the door with a towel and didn't say a word as she helped dry her daughter's hair. They sat together on the couch for the first time in months. The silence between them had softened, no longer sharp and cold, but tentative, cautious. "You still love him," Linda said finally. Julia nodded. "Then why did he leave you like that?" "Because he believed you," Julia answered softly. "And maybe because part of him still doesn't believe he's worth being loved." Linda's eyes glistened. "I didn't mean to ruin everything." "But you did." Linda closed her eyes. "And if I could undo it, I would. I swear to you, Julia, I thought I was protecting you. I didn't think he'd listen to me." Julia let the silence stretch. Then she whispered he always listened. The next morning, Julia went to her routine OB checkup. Dr. Keene greeted her with his usual warmth, but paused when she stepped onto the scale. "You've lost a bit more weight than expected." Julia sighed. "I know. I've been trying to eat." He nodded and gently tapped her chart. "Still vomiting?" "Not as much. Mostly just mornings." He looked up. "And the baby?" "Still kicking." Dr. Keene smiled. "Then someone's listening to all those bedtime stories, huh?" Julia blinked back sudden tears. "I hope so." After the appointment, Dr. Keene walked her out. As they reached the elevator, he hesitated. "You know, Julia, you're stronger than most of the women I see here." She gave a tired smile. "I don't feel strong." "You don't have to feel it to be it." He handed her a note, his personal number. "If you ever need anything at all, you don't have to go through this alone." She clutched the paper and nodded. "Thank you." That night, as she stood at the window humming softly, the baby kicked hard enough to make her gasp. She laughed, hand on her belly, and whispered, "You're still with me. That's all that matters." But in her heart, she still wondered. Where was Noah? Did he ever think of her? And if he did, would he ever find his way back? It was a Saturday morning like any other. Gray skies, the smell of damp concrete, the sound of distant sirens somewhere deeper in Portland. Julia had spent most of the morning folding baby clothes in the living room, her belly now large enough to make even standing up feel like a calculated effort. Linda was out on the small porch, watering the last of her fall strawberries, humming an old tune half out of habit, half to avoid conversation. Then came the sound. Engines. Not one, but several. Julia looked up. Through the lace curtain, She saw something that didn't belong in their working-class neighborhood. A line of black SUVs, windows tinted, tires too clean to have driven far. They slowed to a stop right in front of their apartment building. Julia froze. On the porch, Linda dropped the watering can. "Julia," she called, voice sharp. "There are people. Out front. Rich people." The doorbell rang. Julia's heart thundered in her chest. She pushed herself to her feet, one hand instinctively covering her belly. Linda opened the door before she could reach it. There, standing on the porch in a tailored gray suit, was a man Julia hadn't seen in months. His hair was trimmed, his skin freshly shaved, his eyes more alive than she remembered, and yet still shadowed by something deeper. It was Noah. He took one step forward and whispered, "Hi, Jules." Julia didn't say a word. Noah turned to Linda and nodded politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Bennett. May I come in?" Linda stepped aside without answering. Julia's body tensed as he entered the apartment. His presence filled the room like a wave of cold air behind a closed door. She stared at him, at the expensive watch, the shining shoes, the man who no longer looked like someone sleeping near a heating vent. "What is this?" she asked. "What are you doing here?" Noah took a breath. "I came to explain, to apologize, and to tell you everything I should have told you from the beginning." Julia crossed her arms, her belly heavy and proud between them. "Start talking." Noah gestured to the couch. "May I?" "No," she said. "Talk." He nodded. "I'm not who I said I was. Or rather, I'm not just Noah Reed. My full name is Noah Barnes. My father is Richard Barnes, the aviation executive. Maybe you've heard of him." Julia blinked, stunned. "We had a falling out after my mother died. She was the one person who kept me grounded, and when she passed, everything unraveled. My father brought home a woman 6 months after the funeral. She moved into the house like she owned it. I couldn't stay. I packed a bag and left. I thought I could make it on my own. Turns out I didn't know a damn thing about the world." His voice cracked for a moment, but he steadied it. "I hit rock bottom, slept on benches in shelters under bridges. And then I met you. And somehow, for the first time in a year, I felt human again." Julia's arms dropped slowly to her sides. Noah looked at her now, eyes pleading. "When your mom told me you were just using me to make her angry, that you had a real fiancé out of town, I believed her, because deep down, I couldn't believe you'd actually want someone like me." His voice softened. "And that's on me. That's my damage." She swallowed hard. "So you just disappeared. No note, no word. And now you show up with a caravan and a suit like you've been plucked out of a movie." I didn't think I'd ever get the chance to explain. After I left, my father found me. He was hospitalized with pneumonia, and things changed. We talked, really talked. He asked me to come back to help run the business. I told him I'd only return if I could make peace with what I left behind first. Julia stared at him, eyes welling. "You think you can just walk back in here and everything will be okay?" "No," he said. "I don't. I just wanted to see you again and tell you that I never stopped thinking about you." Then, slowly, his eyes dropped to her belly. "Are you?" Julia didn't flinch. "Yes." His breath caught. "And is it mine?" Something inside her snapped. "Is it yours?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You think I slept with someone else while I was scraping ramen noodles from the bottom of the cabinet, vomiting my soul out every morning, and crying over the man who vanished without a word?" Noah took a step back. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," she cut him off. "You meant to ask. You meant to doubt me, just like you doubted me the day you left." He stood in stunned silence. Julia's voice broke. "You left me, Noah. You left me when I needed you the most. And now you think a suit and a limo and a last name can fix that?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Julia shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "Get out." "Julia, out." Noah turned slowly, walked past Linda, and exited the apartment. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed like a final period. Julia stood in the center of the living room, shaking. Linda stepped forward, but Julia raised a hand. "Don't." And then, for the first time since Noah disappeared, Julia collapsed onto the floor and sobbed like her entire world had fallen apart all over again. For 2 days after Noah left, Julia said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She didn't eat much. She simply moved through the apartment like a ghost tethered to the weight inside her, touching her belly with both love and guilt. Unsure which emotion she deserved more, Linda tried to speak to her once, but Julia walked straight past her into her bedroom. Another time, she made Julia's favorite soup and left it on the nightstand. Julia didn't touch it. On the third morning, Linda stood outside her daughter's room with a coat over her arm and a purse in her hand. Her voice was hesitant. "Julia, I'm going to see Renata in Gresham. She said there's a specialist at her clinic I might consult about the surgery." Julia didn't respond. Linda continued, her tone almost shaky. "I'll be gone for the day. Just rest. Take care of yourself. I'll call when I get there." Then she left, except she wasn't going to Gresham. She wasn't seeing her sister, and there was no medical consultation. Linda Bennett had a different destination in mind. 3 hours and a drained savings account later, she stepped out of a cab in front of an iron-gated estate overlooking the lake in Lake Oswego. It was exactly the kind of place she had always dreamed her daughter would end up in. Columns and fountains and quiet wealth humming beneath manicured perfection. She didn't belong there. She walked up to the intercom and pressed the call button. A guard's voice crackled through. "May I help you?" Linda cleared her throat. "I'm looking for Richard Barnes, or Noah Barnes. It's a personal matter. Urgent." A pause. Then, "Please wait." Minutes passed. Then the gates slowly opened. Linda was led inside and shown to a massive home office with walls of glass and shelves filled with aviation memorabilia. A man in his 60s with a commanding presence and a stare like steel sat behind the desk. Richard Barnes. He gestured to the chair across from him. "I hear you have something important to say." Linda didn't sit. "My name is Linda Bennett. I'm Julia's mother. The woman your son," she faltered, "walked away from." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "I came here to tell you something I should have told him," she said, "because I don't think he'll believe it unless it comes from someone else." She looked him in the eye. "My daughter loved your son. Truly. She brought him into our home when he had nothing, gave him shelter, dignity. She saw the man inside long before he put on that suit. And when she found out she was pregnant, even after he vanished, she chose to keep that child. Alone." Richard's face remained unreadable. Linda swallowed hard. "She's due in a few months. And yes, the baby is Noah's. No one else. There's never been anyone else." Her voice cracked. "I said horrible things. I told your son she had a fiancé, that she was only using him to get back at me. It wasn't true. I was afraid she'd throw her life away on a man with nothing. I didn't realize he was exactly what she needed." Silence filled the room. Linda lowered her voice. "We don't want anything from you. Not your money. Not your charity. I came here because I don't want my grandchild to grow up not knowing who his father was." Richard leaned back, thoughtful. Linda stepped toward the door. "If you could just tell Noah what I said, that would be enough. I won't take up any more of your time." She turned to leave. "Mrs. Bennett," Richard said. "Wait." She turned back. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You may have just done more for your daughter and mine than you realize." Then he picked up his phone and dialed. Later that evening, after sunset, Noah returned from a meeting to find his father waiting for him in the den. "We need to talk," Richard said. Noah frowned. "Is something wrong?" Richard didn't answer. Instead, he handed his son a glass of scotch and nodded toward the leather armchair. Noah sat down, confused. Today, I met a woman, Richard began. Your child's grandmother. Noah stiffened. She told me everything. About Julia. About the pregnancy. About what she said to you. And what she regrets. Noah's throat tightened. She lied. Told me Julia was using me. That there was another man. I know, Richard cut in. And she's sorry. She should have told me sooner. Maybe. But she came today. In person. Alone. Not for herself, for you. Noah ran a hand through his hair. I don't know what to do. I screwed everything up. Richard gave a small shrug. Then unscrew it. Go see her. Fix it. Or don't. But if you wait too long, you'll regret it every time you look at that empty space beside you. Noah didn't sleep that night. By morning, he had packed a small overnight bag, stopped by a florist, and ordered the most absurdly large cake Julia had ever dreamed of eating. He stood at the front door of her apartment by 9:30 a.m. sharp, ringed eyes and trembling hands, waiting for the door to open. But it wasn't Julia who answered. It was Linda, and her face was gray. She's not here, she said hoarsely. She's at the hospital. There was pain, bleeding. They think it might be the baby. Noah didn't wait for the rest. He dropped the flowers and ran. The rain had begun again, hard, fast, unrelenting. It pounded the windshield as Noah sped through downtown Portland, his hands locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white. Traffic lights blurred into halos. His suit jacket was soaked through, but he didn't care. Every second mattered. When he burst into the emergency entrance of Portland General Hospital, the staff turned, startled by the sight of a drenched man with wild eyes and a voice cracking with urgency. Julia Bennett, he gasped. Where is she? She was brought in this morning. She's pregnant, bleeding. The nurse behind the desk blinked, then tapped at her keyboard. Are you family? I'm the father of her child. Something in his tone, sharp, broken, undeniable, made her pause. She nodded toward the hallway. Room 5. But you'll need to speak to Dr. Wallace first. Where is he? Down the corridor, past the nurse's station. Noah didn't wait for permission. He ran. When he reached the end of the hallway, he spotted Dr. Keene standing outside a room, arms crossed, brows furrowed. The older man turned as Noah approached, breathing hard. You must be Noah, he said calmly. Is she okay? Noah demanded. Is the baby? Dr. Keene held up a hand. Slow down. She's stable for now, but the bleeding was significant. We managed to get it under control, but we're not out of the woods. Noah swayed slightly, as if the floor beneath him was tilting. Can I see her? Briefly. She's sedated. Needs rest. The doctor paused. She kept whispering your name. Noah swallowed hard. Dr. Keene stepped aside. Inside the room, the world slowed. Julia lay motionless on the hospital bed, face pale against the white pillow, for lines running from her arm to a bag hanging overhead. Monitors beeped steadily. The light from the window was dimmed by cloud and rain. Noah approached slowly, step by step, like walking toward something sacred. When he reached the bedside, he dropped to one knee and took her hand. Small, cold, but still hers. I'm here, he whispered, voice trembling. I'm so sorry, Julia. I should have stayed. I should have trusted you. I let my fear speak louder than my love, and I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. But I need you to know I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. He reached out and gently placed his hand over her belly. Hey, little one, he murmured. It's Dad. I'm sorry I left. But I'm back now, and I promise I'm not going anywhere. He kissed Julia's knuckles and leaned forward, resting his forehead against her wrist, his shoulders shaking. Behind him, the nurse appeared at the door and motioned gently. Time's up. Noah stood slowly, glanced at Julia one last time, and walked out with a heart so full it ached. He didn't go home. He stayed, all night. He sat in the waiting area outside her room, arms crossed, chin tucked to his chest, refusing to sleep. At 3 a.m., when a nurse offered him a blanket, he declined. At 5:30, when Dr. Keene walked past and saw him still sitting there, he simply nodded. By morning, the bleeding had stopped. Julia was stable. When she finally woke, the first thing she saw was a vase of crushed scarlet roses on the nightstand, and a man asleep in the corner, his head resting on a borrowed pillow, his body curled uncomfortably in the hospital chair. "Noah," she rasped. He jolted awake and rushed to her bedside. "You're okay," he said, tears in his eyes. "You scared me so badly." Julia looked at him, weary and confused. "Why are you here?" "Because I love you, because I was wrong, and because this is our baby, and I want to be here every step of the way. If you'll let me." She closed her eyes for a long moment, as if searching the deepest part of herself. When she opened them again, her voice was quiet. "You left." "I know." "You doubted me." "I know." "You hurt me." "I hate myself for it." There was a long silence. Then Julia whispered, "And I still love you." Noah broke. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. That afternoon, Dr. Keene returned with news that made them both cry again. Relief this time. "The baby's heartbeat is strong. Everything's stabilizing. But Julia, you'll need full rest from now until delivery. Stress is no longer an option." Julia nodded. "Understood." Noah added softly, "I'll make sure of it." The doctor smiled. "I don't know what happened between you two, but whatever it was, fix it. Babies sense things." Before he left, he patted Noah on the shoulder. "Welcome to fatherhood." That night, in a private hospital room arranged by Noah and paid in full by Richard Barnes, Julia lay in bed with Noah beside her, his hand over hers, his head on her shoulder. They said nothing for a long time, but silence no longer felt empty. It felt like home. 2 weeks later, Julia moved into a townhouse just outside of Lake Oswego, a quiet corner of the city tucked between trees and walking trails, far from the chaos of downtown Portland. The walls were freshly painted, the kitchen warm with sunlight, and every room was prepared not just for her, but for the life growing inside her. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't her mother's apartment. It was something else. It was hers, and Noah's. After weeks of slow, careful conversations, shared silences, and hospital breakfasts eaten side by side, they had come to a quiet agreement. No promises of fairy tales. No illusions that the past hadn't left wounds. But something new. Something honest. Noah had told her everything. About his mother's death. About the spiraling grief. About the shame of being born into wealth and yet feeling like a fraud without it. About how he had believed her mother's words because they aligned too well with the worst things he already believed about himself. "You didn't hurt me because you hated me," Julia said one night as they lay on the couch, her feet propped on his lap, his hands resting over the swell of her stomach. "You hurt me because you hated yourself." Noah had nodded, eyes glistening. "I want our child to never know that kind of pain," she continued. "No lies. No shame. No running away." He kissed her knuckles. "Me too." Richard Barnes came by one weekend, awkward in a denim jacket and holding a stuffed giraffe. He stood in the entryway like a man who had never stepped foot in anything smaller than a penthouse, and Julia watched with measured calm as he set the toy gently on the kitchen counter. "I know I'm early," he said, "but I didn't want to miss the chance to apologize. To you." Julia crossed her arms. "For what exactly?" "For the assumptions. For the silence. For raising a son who didn't know how to fight for the people he loves." She didn't soften. "You raised a son who survived." Richard blinked. "I suppose I did." He turned to leave, but she stopped him. "You're welcome to visit. When the baby comes. If you treat him like family, not like a business extension." Richard nodded, humbled. "Of course." As he left, Julia caught Noah watching her with something like awe. "You scare the hell out of him," he said. "Good," she replied, half smiling. "Someone has to." The days passed gently. Julia read books on parenting, ate strange midnight snacks, and laughed at the way her body refused to cooperate with gravity. Noah joined a counseling group for men with estranged fathers. He took Julia to every appointment, learned how to count contractions, and painted the nursery pale green after Julia vetoed 7 other colors. And on a quiet Friday morning in early March, when the wind rustled the trees and the sky was silver with light, Julia woke with a strange stillness in her chest. She didn't feel pain. She felt peace. She reached for Noah's hand. "It's time." He blinked, sat up, then panicked. "Now." She laughed. "Yes, now." The birth wasn't cinematic. It wasn't painless. It was long. It was exhausting. It was hours of sweat and screaming and tears. But at 5:42 p.m., as rain fell outside the hospital window, a cry filled the room. A baby girl. Noah sobbed. Julia didn't cry until the nurse placed the infant on her chest, warm and slippery and pink and perfect. She stared down at the tiny face, eyes closed, mouth open, and whispered, "Hi, my love. I'm your mama." The baby blinked, yawned, and settled. Julia looked up and met Noah's gaze. He mouthed, "Thank you." She shook her head. "Thank you for coming back." They named her Alma Bennett Barnes. She had Julia's nose, Noah's eyes, and a stubborn grip that made even the pediatrician laugh. In the weeks that followed, the world grew smaller and more sacred. Time was measured in diaper changes, bottle warmings, skin-to-skin naps. Their townhouse filled with the scent of lavender baby lotion and the rhythm of lullabies at midnight. Linda visited once a week. She never stayed long, never overstepped. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes flowers, but mostly she sat quietly, watching her daughter become a mother with a mix of pride and regret in her eyes. One afternoon, as Julia was rocking Alma in the nursery, Linda stood by the door. "She's going to be all right," Linda said softly. Julia nodded. "Because I will be." Linda stepped forward and pressed a kiss to Julia's temple. "You're stronger than I ever was." Julia didn't answer, but she smiled, and that was enough. Later that night, as Alma slept between them in a bassinet shaped like a cradle from an old fairy tale, Julia whispered into the hush, "Do you think she'll understand one day?" Noah kissed her shoulder. "Understand what?" "That she was born from chaos, from heartbreak, from fear." He shook his head. "No, she'll know she was born from love. That's all she needs to know." Julia watched their daughter breathe, and for the first time in what felt like years, she finally believed it. Spring melted into summer. The house grew fuller of sound, of warmth, of tiny clothes, and even tinier socks. Julia found herself learning how to live all over again, but not in the way survival had once taught her. This time, she was not clawing her way through the dark. She was planting things, watering them, watching them grow. Alma grew fast, too fast. At 3 months, she already rolled onto her stomach and lifted her head like a soldier in training. At 4 months, she laughed for the first time, one full, bubbling note that startled both Julia and Noah into tears. At 6 months, she reached out her arms when Julia entered the room, and that gesture alone made every sleepless night worth it. Noah never missed a milestone. He worked with his father now, on his own terms. 3 days in the office, 2 days remote. He didn't wear suits unless he had to. He refused to move them into the mansion, even when Richard offered. "We don't need a palace," he'd said. "We just need space to love each other properly." And Julia had known then, beyond all doubt, that the man who once vanished into the city streets had finally come home. One Saturday morning, as the sun spilled through the nursery window and Alma dozed in her crib, Noah sat on the back porch, sipping coffee, barefoot and grinning. Julia joined him, wrapping a cardigan around her shoulders. "You ever think," she asked, "about how strange it all is?" He glanced sideways. "Strange how?" "How we met. The lie. The act. The almost. The goodbye." Noah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And the coming back." She nodded. And the coming back. There was silence between them, soft and full. Then Noah reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small velvet box. Julia stared. I wanted to do this differently, he said. But the truth is, nothing about us has been traditional. Not the beginning. Not the middle. So maybe it's okay if the promise isn't either. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, gold, without diamonds. But etched inside the band was one word, again. Julia laughed, then cried, then nodded. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. She took the ring, slid it on her finger, and whispered, yes. It wasn't a grand wedding, just a small garden ceremony beneath a maple tree. Linda stood beside Julia, holding Alma in a white dress with a satin bow. Richard gave a brief toast and tried not to cry when Alma giggled at his tie. And when the justice of the peace said, you may kiss, Noah didn't hesitate. He pulled Julia into him like they were already halfway through a lifetime and kissed her like they were starting all over again, which in some way they were. After the guests left and the sun began to dip behind the hills, Julia walked through the yard barefoot, Alma on her hip. The wind carried the scent of honeysuckle and fresh soil. Noah watched her from the porch. She looks like you when you're angry, he called. Julia smirked. Then you better not make her mad. He stood and walked to her, wrapping his arms around both of them. Promise me something, he said. Anything. No matter what happens, we never shut each other out again. Julia rested her forehead against his. No more locked doors. Ever. They stood there for a long time, the three of them, wrapped in each other, wrapped in the promise that had taken a long, broken road to reach. Because the truth was, this wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real.